Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the glow of a crackling Zulu forge. And trust me, you probably won't survive the heat unless you've got a secret cooling trick involving, wait for it, cattle dung. Picture the midday sun beating down on Shaka's warriors as they sharpen their assegais before marching into battle. Now imagine standing beside the blacksmith, the air thick with sparks and sweat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your local location and what time it is where you are, so I know who's tuning in live. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drag your feet through the ember-strewn courtyard of the Zulu forge, the scent of smoldering charcoal heavy in the air. Sparks skitter across the stone floor as the blacksmith hammers red-hot steel into shape, each strike ringing like tribal drums echoing through the valley. You hear the rhythmic beat of metal on metal, and somewhere nearby, cattle low in their corrals, blissfully unaware of how their dung will soon transform into a high-tech coolant. Historians still debate whether the first Zulu smith discovered dung quenching by accident, perhaps a stray clod landed on a hot blade, or if it was a guarded secret passed down from ancestral iron workers, but either way, it reshaped the art of blacksmithing. You lean closer to the forge's glow, feeling the heat prickling your skin like electric static. A strange fact drifts into your mind. Fresh cattle dung can contain up to 80% water by weight, releasing a plume of steam so forceful it cools steel faster than ordinary water or oil. That misty hiss crackles around the metal, cracking the surface and creating microscopic fractures that harden the blade to a razor's edge. You can practically taste the sulfurous tang of dung combustion, an odd but oddly fitting seasoning for Zulu steel. Above, we mentioned Shaka's campaigns, but let's zero in on that famed 1816 Battle of Gakokli Hill, when Zulu forces first wielded superior assegais forged in these very forges. The difference in blade hardness gave his warriors a fearsome edge over rival clans. You imagine Shaka himself stomping through the camp, inspecting each new spear and demanding perfection. No half-hearted blades here, he might have growled. Meanwhile, curious herders sniffed at fresh dung piles, testing texture and aroma, searching for that sweet spot between moisture content and fibrous grit. You crouch beside a weathered elder, his leather apron scorched from decades at the hearth, as he plunges a glowing ingot into a pit lined with ash and tamped down dung. Steam explodes in a hissing cloud, billowing around you like a stage fog machine gone wild. 3 light jokes pop into your head about calling this the original dry ice method, about fans at Disney wanting this backstage, about dung quenching, beating any industrial coolant. But you stifle them, letting the ancient ritual speak for itself. The ingot emerges with a deep blue sheen flecked with ash residues that blacksmiths will later grind away. You brush soot from your palm and marvel at how a humble byproduct could yield steel tough enough to cut through leather shields. You remember that sunscreen made from crocodile fat. Well, this is arguably Zulu metallurgy's reptilian cousin, equally bizarre but somehow brilliantly effective. You stand and feel the rumble of hammers shifting in tempo, a signal that the quenching sequence is complete. The forge's glow dims as the smith lifts the cooled blade skyward, raising it like a sacred relic before the assembled apprentices. The moment feels electric, as if the spirit of every ancestor who first learned to coax steel from ironstone now hums in the air. A murmur ripples through the onlookers. Behold the power of dung-cold steel. You step back, letting the crowd's energy wash over you, and notice the ground still steaming where droplets landed. A stray ember skitters toward your sandal, and you hop back with a tiny yelp proof that this dance with fire and dung isn't for the faint of heart. Yet here, amid the haze of vapor and coal, you sense a simple truth: innovation often springs from necessity, and sometimes the oddest materials yield the greatest breakthroughs. As you wipe sweat from your brow, you glimpse the elder's knowing smile. You're part of something ancient and alive, a story unfolding in every hiss and spark. And even though you joked about Disney and crocodile sunscreen, you're breathless with wonder and maybe just a little grateful you're not the one plunging red steel into steaming dung at midnight. So, with your heart still pounding from the forge's roar, you tuck away those sparks of humor and lean in for the next secret. Because in the next stretch of our journey, you'll discover how entire villages organize themselves around these forges, where iron, fire, and cattle dung forged not just weapons, but the very spirit of a people. You step beyond the forge's glow and into the heart of a Zulu ironworking village where each hut's silhouette flickers against the twilight sky, and the steady rhythm of hammers forms the community's evening chorus. Here, the Induna, the village magistrate, oversees every ember and anvil strike, ensuring that blacksmiths from different clans share techniques and dung-quenching secrets without stepping on each other's toes. You hear the low murmur of voices blending in isiZulu as apprentices pass glowing billets of steel down the line, each awaiting its turn in the communal hearth. It's a far cry from solitary workbenches. This is collective craftsmanship, with each forge serving as both workshop and social hub. Above the clamor of metal smoke from charcoal hearths spirals into the dusky air, carrying the scent of acacia wood mingled with cattle dung's earthy tang. Strange fact, smoke signals from these forges were sometimes used to announce royal visits or the end of harvest season, their plumes arranged like punctuation marks against the hills. You lean in close enough to feel the heat ripple off the bricks like standing too near a traditional electric heater, and you realize the blacksmiths here aren't just entrepreneurs in iron. They're the village's heartbeat, forging not only weapons, but bonds of mutual respect. Historians still debate whether Shaka centralized these forged villages under his direct command or allowed them to flourish organically. But either way, the Induna's role cemented social cohesion and kept sparks from flying between rival smiths. You wander past a circle of apprentices seated on woven mats coals, glowing red beneath a shallow clay pot, where they're tempering awls and spear tips. The Induna paces among them, a carved staff in hand, nodding approvingly when he sees the precise swirl marks left by dung quenching those telltale steam rings that signal a master's touch. You drag your fingers through the loose sand at your feet and feel each grain catch like a tiny reminder of the earth's raw material beneath their feet, iron ore charcoal and manure. It's oddly grounding, like kneading dough before baking bread, and you can almost taste the warm, iron-rich dust on your tongue, a sensory note that lingers long after the forge's roar has faded. A troop of elders sits nearby, sipping sweet sorghum beer from calabashes, their laughter a low rumble under the din of metal. You catch snatches of song praising ancestors who first struck sparks from stone axes, a tribute to blacksmithing's deep roots in Zulu culture. Imagine those elders debating whether the latest batch of spears will hold their edge against British breech-loading rifles at the 1839 Battle of Isandlwana, a clash that shocked the world when Zulu forces routed imperial troops. You can practically feel their collective pride and tension coiled in the air like audience members at a whispered football match commentary, waiting for the next big play. Then you shift your attention to the children scampering around the perimeter, each clutching a small metal nail they hammered themselves earlier that day. Their faces shine with excitement when a passing smith offers a quick demonstration of dung-quenched steel bending, but not breaking the metal, sighing instead of snapping. You recall above how quenched billets hissed in pits, and now here you see that same ritual distilled into a moment of wonder for the next generation. It's like teaching kids to code Hello World, to spark a love of programming. Only this code writes itself in steam and soot. You lean against a wooden post carved with ancestral motifs and inhale the layered scents, the nutty aroma of sorghum, the smoky sweet bite of dung steam, the faint tang of sweat and leather aprons. Each inhale carries a story of villages bound by shared hearthfires, of indunas who mediated disputes over who owned which lump of ore, and of wise women who dried and stored dung in precisely shaped patties so that each quench pit would glow with even heat. Strange fact, some forge villages rotated their dung supplies with lunar cycles, believing that quenching under a waxing moon yielded tougher steel, a belief that persisted even as scientific thermodynamics offered other explanations. As you rise to move on, you notice how the forge's collective hum has a musical quality, like a choir in perfect harmony. Apprentices chant counterpoints to hammer beats, elders tap calabashes in gentle rhythm, and the induna's staff drums a measured cadence when he crosses the anvil line. It's no accident that these gatherings doubled as community councils, trade marriage arrangements, and village decisions were hashed out here just as sparks flew from the anvil. You watch a smith pass a finished spearhead to his neighbor for final inspection, the blade's dull sheen hinting at dung-cooled hardness waiting to be revealed in battle. You shuffle forward on the packed earth floor, feeling it yield beneath your feet like the soft carpet of communal hearthside camaraderie. You catch the induna's eye for a moment, and he gives a subtle nod, a gesture acknowledging your place among observers and participants alike. In that nod, you sense the forge's true purpose. More than producing weapons or tools, it forges unity, discipline, and shared identity. It's like watching a well-oiled machine where every cog is a person bound by fire iron and the humble cattle dung that cools the hottest sparks. So, as the forge's glow dims and lanterns are lit to guide the smith's home, you carry with you the imprint of a community welded together by heat and ritual. You can almost hear the echo of those hammer strikes in distant hills, a reminder that innovation lives where hearts and hammers meet. And even as you leave the forge's circle behind, you know its flame still burns in village songs, in the laughter of apprentices, and in every quenched blade sharpened at daybreak. You step into the cool pre-dawn air beside a row of dung patties laid out on woven mats, the pale light catching flecks of dew on their rough surfaces. Above, we've seen entire villages orbit forges like planets around the sun. Now, you're getting down to essentials, how Zulu herders and smiths teamed up to pick the perfect cattle dung for quenching red-hot steel. Imagine crouching beside a smoldering bloomery pit just as smoke curls into the sky, and sensing that the secret to a sharper blade lies not in rare metals, but under a nearby cow's rear end. You reach out to touch a fresh lump pressed out by a grazing Nguni heifer the night before. It yields under your thumb like soft clay, the moisture glinting in the morning light. This fresh dung, brimming with up to 80% water content, delivers an explosive steam burst when steel plunges in. Think of it as the original high-pressure hose, only with a faint whiff of barnyard zest. Strange fact, herders even say that dung from cows fed on rain-softened grasses produces cooler, gentler steam, almost like switching from a fire hose to a garden sprinkler, ideal for delicate sword tangling without snapping the blade's spine. You probably won't survive without gloves here, but hey, who needs Michelin protection when you've got bovine coolant? A wise old smith leans over and pinches a piece of aged, sun-baked dung in his fingers. It's crumbly, almost chalk-like, and the scent has mellowed to something earthy and faintly sweet. Imagine damp forest floor after a rainstorm. This aged dung, stripped of excess moisture, yields a slower, steadier steam when you quench, ensuring uniform cooling that minimizes warping. Historians still debate whether fresh or aged dung was the original go-to, but some claim the earliest smiths discovered both methods by chance, perhaps after a scraped knee or two, courtesy of uneven cooling. You tilt your head as the herder explains that not all dung is created equal. Cattle grazing on different veld grasses produce distinct dung textures, tufted clumps from tall sugar grasses versus smooth pellets from low-lying sedges. The former, full of fibrous bundles, creates a frothy steam akin to a milkshake mix of fast and frothy, while the latter forms a glassy steam plume, more like a gentle latte foam. You remember that sunscreen made from crocodile poop? Yes, we've covered weird ancient coolants before, but this one wins the most likely to clear a barn award hands down. Your fingers brush the stray straw sticking out of a patty, and you inhale the faint aroma of green grass and animal warmth. Herders say that a light perfume of end-of-rain veld hints at a higher silica content in the dung, which may impart tiny abrasive particles to the quenched steam, another strange little trick to micro-polish your blade. It's like swapping your microfiber cloth for a Scotch-Brite pad at just the right moment. You can almost taste the mineral tang at the back of your throat, a reminder that every quench carries a hint of the pasture itself. You crouch lower to inspect a row of patties arranged in order of firmness like test tubes in a lab. The herder pokes each one with a charred stick to check moisture. A solid thunk means too dry, a watery thwack means too wet, and the perfect plop means you've hit quench nirvana. Imagine selecting the ideal avocado at the store only here under the knife's glare. 3 light jokes flicker through your mind about avocado toast, forging the ultimate weapon, about cows earning chef's choice stickers for their rear ends, about rationing dung like gourmet truffle shavings. But you bite them back, savoring the ritual. Nearby apprentices fan the dung-lined quench pit to keep stray embers at bay, and their synchronized flicks send a lullaby-like whisper across the courtyard. You shade your eyes and watch heat waves dance above the pit like ghosts rising from a simmering pot. The interplay of hot steel and steaming dung hisses like a kettle on full blast, a sound you realize could double as the firing cue for any high-end espresso bar if espresso bars were fueled by charcoal and cow byproducts. You rise and wipe a bead of sweat from your brow. An involuntary sniff reminds you of the subtlety of these scents, tobacco's sweetness, from old briars, slight musk of fermented grass, and the underlying barnyard funk that keeps the engine of innovation running. The herder hands you a small gourd of diluted dung slurry, an experimental mix. Some smiths use swirling cooled dung with ash and charcoal fines for a triple threat quench. A single dunk yields a swirling plume reminiscent of dry ice, but with the added bonus that the ash cleans soot from the blade's surface. You grin, picturing swordsmiths banking on this quench for both cooling and DIY polishing in one step. As you step back, the herder stoops to scoop a sample of dung-fed steam residue, fine black grains he'll mix into mortar for hut repairs, another testament to zero-waste living. It's like seeing the blade's byproduct become the building blocks for community homes. Strange fact, some villages use these residue grains to seal wooden plots against termite infestations, believing the charcoal dung mix repelled the little devils better than modern chemicals. You can almost hear future termite contractors wincing at that ancestral warranty. You pivot your gaze toward a nearby demonstration. A smith plunges a glowing spearhead into a semi-solid dung block, swirling it twice, and pulling out a blade, singing with a crisp ping. The blade's surface glitters under torchlight flecks of silica and char patterns dancing like constellations. Apprentices murmur appreciatively at the uniform temper line, a visual signature that only the most discerning eyes catch. You could market this as the Zulu fan temp mode: 1 swirl for strength, 2 for flexibility, 3 for that perfect snap. You noted in your mental blueprint for forging the ultimate gadget, a spinning fan that cools itself with steam, quench tech startup. Anyone stepping away, you feel the heat fading from your skin as if the dung's latent coolness is radiating back. You run your fingers along a cooled spearhead's fuller and marvel at how something so humble can sculpt the edge of empire. The herder's wise smile says it all in Zulu metallurgy. Knowing your dung was as critical as knowing your ore. It's the partnership of pasture and forage cattle and craftsmen that carved history, one quenched blade at a time. And so, as the sun edges higher and the forge villages awaken to a new day, you carry with you this oddball lesson in the world's grand metallurgical tapestry. The humblest threads, like cattle dung, can weave the strongest steel. You crouch beside a shallow trench, carved into sunbaked earth, its sides packed tight by firm hands and rhythmic stomps that echo like distant drum beats across the forge yard. Above, you've learned to recognize prime dung and select optimal moisture. Now you're about to prepare the sacred quench pit itself, a ritual as precise as a watchmaker's balance wheel, but built with ash, sand, and those carefully chosen dung patties. Imagine the clang of hammers dim into silence as villagers gather round, each holding a shovel or clump of ash in reverent hands, readying for the moment when searing steel meets steaming coolant. You grip the cool wooden handle of a shovel as you lift a scoop of fine white ash harvested from burnt marula wood that once crackled under the full moon during the 1816 Battle of Cockley Hill celebrations. Historians still debate whether Shaka's victory feast ever included ash-smoked meat that flavored the first quench pits, or if later generations retrofitted the story to honor ancestral triumphs. But either way, marula ash is prized for its ability to insulate heat and manage steam. You brush the ash into a neat layer along the pit's floor, the powder puffing up like ghostly mist before settling into a whitish blanket. Next, you sprinkle in a layer of clean sand, each granule as smooth as polished glass, its uniformity ensuring even heat distribution when the pit comes alive. A strange fact drifts into your mind. Some smiths claim that riverbank sand cooled by morning mists yields fewer steam eruptions than dune sand heated all day by the sun, reducing the chance of scorching your arms during a quench. You probably won't survive a face full of steam without that knowledge. But hey, trial and error is the smith's unspoken rite of passage. Nearby apprentices lay out the dung patties in a concentric circle around the pit center, spacing them like ancient ritual stones. Each patty is pressed flat and compacted by foot to eliminate air pockets that could turn a smooth steam flow into an explosive geyser. You lean closer, feeling the cool breeze skim across the hardened dung surface, and catch a faint whiff of earth and grass scent notes that anchor the forge to the veld beyond. 3 light jokes drift into your mind about calling this the world's spiciest hot tub, about booking a steam room experience for stressed swordsmiths, about marketing dung spa retreats. But you tuck them away mindful of the craft's gravity. A village elder approaches with a smooth stone pestle, tapping it against each patty to confirm firmness. The sound is a soft thock that resonates like a low drum, and you feel it vibrate through your fingertips. That tapping ritual doubles as a final quality check and a community signal. When each patty echoes just right, the forge master knows the pit is ready. You press your ear to the side of the trench and hear the hollow resonance, deep in proof you've achieved optimal density. It's akin to checking a guitar's body for resonance before strumming the first chord. In the center of the pit, you shovel a small mound of glowing coals from the forge's hearth. The coals hiss as they meet the ash and sand, crackling like Rice Crisps, dancing in hot oil. Strange fact, some blacksmiths mix crushed bone fragments into these coals, believing the added calcium yields a sharper, more flexible edge, though others argue it's an old wives' tale born from grinding up cattle horns long simmered in dung stew. Whichever side you stand on, the coal's heat flickers rose-like, ready to awaken the pit's latent power. You carefully mound a thin layer of ash over the coals, cocooning them before you place the dung patties on top. As you arrange each patty's edge to overlap slightly, you notice how the prairie grass fibers align like grain in fine wood nature's blueprint, guiding steam channels. You brush your thumb over the fibrous top, marveling at how the dung's texture has been refined by countless preparations. You remember above how artisans lined quench pits with dung in the early Meiji era to add a touch of nostalgia, and you realize this precise layering echoes centuries of blacksmith wisdom. The sun's rays slant lower, and you spot elders draping ceremonial cloth along the pit's rim. The cloth bears traditional black and white zebra stripes, symbolizing balance between fire's fury and water's calm, a motif borrowed from ancient Nguni art. Historians still debate whether those cloths served purely decorative purposes or if they helped mark the boundary between the forge's private domain and communal gathering space. But their presence elevates quenching from mere metallurgy to performance. You feel the pit's hush deepen as drums begin to pulse in the distance, a rhythmic countdown to the first quench. You stand and dust your hands on a leather apron streaked with ash and soot, the smell of charred hide mingling with Dung's earthy perfume. You notice apprentices stirring embers in the hearth, ensuring the coals in the pit remain glowing but not incandescent too cold, and the dung won't steam. Too hot, and the patties might catch fire, turning quenching into a flash fry. It's a delicate balance, like dialing in the perfect temperature on a chef's sous vide machine, only with zero electronics and a lot more smoke. A slender Zulu war chant rises as musicians approach lifting handheld drums and rattles. Their beat aligns with the forge's pulse, and you realize this entire process is as much about community rhythm as it is about science. You lean back and watch as the forge master raises a sponged rag soaked in cattle hoof oil, a finishing touch to coat the pit's edge, sealing in the steam and protecting adjacent soil from scorching. The rag's oily sheen catches torchlight, sending dancing reflections across the pit surface. Finally, the Induna steps forward, raising a leather horn to his lips and sounding a deep call that reverberates through the valley like a bass note. The signal sends apprentices scurrying to don gloves and ready long-handled tongs. Your heart thumps in sync with the gathering drums as the forge master lifts a glowing steel bloom from the hearth, the metal's orange brilliance stark against the cooling dusk. In the silent space between drums, you sense the village inhale collectively, bracing for the hiss. As the bloom descends into the pit's hot womb, you step back to avoid the first roar of steam, a sound like 1,000 whispered legends erupting at once. The dung patties sizzle and shriek, channeling steam into precise bursts that envelop the steel in a swirling veil. The smell is pungent, yet strangely comforting, like the scent of embers in a woodpile after rain. In those few seconds, you witness centuries of ingenuity distilled into a single, transformative moment. When the steam finally subsides, the steel lies cool and tempered in the pit's heart, ready for extraction and final shaping. You crouch low and peer in, watching the bloom surface glint like obsidian flecked with ash. The quench pit stands empty now, its layers of ash, sand, and dung having done their duty. A chorus of Hamba Kahle Go Well drifts through the crowd, blessing both metal and maker. You rise, brushing ash from your knees, and realize the true magic of the quench pit? It's not merely a tool, but a stage where community ritual and technique converge. In that hissing steam, every villager sees a piece of themselves, herders supplying dung, elders offering wisdom, apprentices honing skill, and ancestors watching over. And as you step away from the pit's rim, you carry with you the heartbeat of a people who turned cattle byproduct into the crucible of empire. You step closer to the roaring hearth where charcoal flames lick the sides of a battered clay bloomery, and you feel the heat wrap around you like a warm blanket fresh from the dryer. Above you, laid out ash, sand, and dung in ritual precision. Now you're at the moment when raw iron ore transforms into a glowing bloom of steel ready for quenched glory. Imagine standing beside this very furnace on that fateful day in January 1879, when Zulu steel met British bayonets at Isandlwana. Only here, you're more concerned with reaching forging temperature than imperial tactics. You crouch as the forge master stokes the coals with a wooden poker, puffing bellows strapped to goatskin sacks that hiss in time with your own heartbeat. The air feeds the flames, pushing temperatures past, while a 200-degree style hot enough to melt copper, but tame enough to encourage carbon absorption in the iron. Strange fact, some smiths claim that older bellows made from wild kudu hides reached higher pressures than goatskin versions, yet they leaked dust that scarred blade surfaces like upgrading to a sports car engine that belches soot. You smirk at the idea of a clunky roller bearing a fancy engine, but here every puff counts in coaxing that bloom from ore. You drag your hand through the smoky haze and taste the sweet tang of burning marula wood mixed with the acrid bite of charcoal, a scent so rich it could be bottled as eau de forge. 3 light jokes bubble up about fans petitioning for a cool mode about charcoal lattes trending in artisanal cafes, about starting a Kickstarter for scented candles called Smith's Sweat. But you tuck them away, letting the furnace's roar take center stage. As embers glow red, the smith reaches into a shallow pit, pulling out lumpy nuggets of magnetite ore pounded down by hammer and anvil. You remember that ore came from rivers where you once dipped your feet as a child, its dark grains glinting like polished gemstones under midday sun. Now those same grains glow like molten stars in the forge's core. Historians still debate whether Nguni ironworkers learned bloomery techniques from ancient East African traders or developed them independently, but either way, their furnaces burned brighter and longer than many contemporaneous European forges. You lean in as the bloom rests atop glowing coals, steam rising, where droplets of oil sacrificial offerings from the Induna's personal gourd hit the hot metal. That oil bath sparks a hiss that sets your teeth tingling as if someone whispered the secret chord of ASMR into your ear. You reach out with heat-proof tongs to rotate the bloom, ensuring even heating and uniform carbon uptake. The metal surface shifts from dull gray to a molten sheen, chasing you with waves of red and orange that remind you of sunrise over the Drakensberg. Nearby, apprentices watch in silent reverence, their eyes reflecting furnace flames like twin campfires. You hear the faint shuffle of feet on packed earth and the low murmur of elders quoting old proverbs about fire being the womb of creation. A strange tidbit drifts in some smith's crushed termite mound clay into the bloom, believing its kaolin content refined slag separation. Think of it as a natural flux, centuries before chemists penned formulas in labs. You can almost taste the earthy grit on your tongue, a reminder that every step here blends art and alchemy. Above, the smith drums his hammer on a stone ledge, signaling the moment to extract the semi-molten bloom. You pull back as he yanks the glowing mass from the hearth, its heat billowing around you like a dragon's breath. The bloom rattles in the tongs, incandescent and heavy, a raw promise of blades to come. You breathe in deep, savoring the mix of smoke, sweat, and that unmistakable metallic tang that tastes like history itself. The smith sets the bloom on an anvil raised on termite mound clay, the solid base absorbing shock and stray sparks. With rhythmic strikes, he compresses the bloom, squeezing out pockets of slag in rhythmic bursts that echo like tribal drums. You hear each ping and thunk in your bones like your own heart sinking to the cadence of creation. 3 quick jokes pop up about calling this the world's harshest spa treatment, about blades needing a cocoa butter massage, about forging your abs with hammer curls. But you hold the humor, awed by the forging ballet. As the bloom cools enough to handle apprentices, pass it along a line for reheating and more refining, turning impure iron into a cohesive bar that glows like dawn's embers. You recall above how dung quenching hardened steel. Here in the bloomery's heat, that transformation begins. Each cycle ramps up carbon content until the metal's edge can split a reed in two. It's like watching coarse flour turn into fine pastry dough, under patient kneading, only hotter, and with a lot more smoke. You step back as the line moves on, giving you space to admire a short steel bar glowing dimly at the edge of the hearth. That bar will be extended, folded, and quenched in dung until it becomes an assegai trusted companion of warriors. Historians still debate whether the Zulu bloomery process peaked before or after European contact. But one thing's clear: the skill here rivals any modern steel mill with no electricity or computers involved. A sudden breeze carries the crackle of embers and the clink of hammer on steel, reminding you that in a few short hours, this raw bloom will be a blade strong enough to change battles. You inhale deeply, tasting charcoal sweetness and a subterranean hint of iron, like biting into a rare truffle trout. The sensory memory weaves itself into your own story, binding you to these smiths and their inherited craft. As dusk settles and lanterns lift their glow, you stand in the lingering warmth, the bloomery's heat fading yet echoing in your veins. You've witnessed transformation at its most primal ore, to bloom to bar to blade. And soon that blade will dive into steaming dung, sealing its hardness in a final quench. But for now, you feel the pulse of the forge reflect in your own pulse, a reminder that fire and earth, dung and ash have been writing human history long before we could pen our own tales. You steady your breath as you step to the edge of the steaming quench pit, holding the glowing steel bloom in long-handled tongs. Above, you've seen the bloomery's fiery birth. Now you're at the grand finale, where red-hot steel meets the dung mist, in a hissing ballet of steam and science. Imagine plunging a blade screaming at nearly 800 degrees Celsius into a shallow mire of steaming cattle dung and watching milliseconds decide whether it snaps like a twig or rings like a temple bell. You probably won't survive a face full of this steam without wincing. But that's the thrill of Zulu blacksmithing. You drag your feet forward, feeling the pit's circumference tremble as dung patties belt out a staccato hiss of vapor. The quench master, arms bare and muscles gleaming with sweat, gives you a knowing nod. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he plunges the steel in at a 45-degree angle enough to break the surface tension and channel the steam away from nearby hands. 3 light jokes flicker in your mind about calling this the world's hottest dry sauna, about wearable steam technology and startup pitch decks, about fans begging for an auto-quenched feature, but you stifle them eager to learn the sacred swirl. As the steel breaches the dung surface, a plume of steam erupts, arching like a geyser in miniature. You hear the pop, pop, pop of moisture pockets bursting, each a microscopic shock, absorbing heat in a fraction of a heartbeat. Strange fact. Some smiths swear that dung from bulls yields a more aggressive steam burst than cows, thanks to slightly higher urea content, a detail you'd never guess unless you'd tasted your way through every livestock paddock. You lean in close enough to feel the steam's pressure against your cheeks, like the breath of an erupting volcano kissing your skin. The quench master yanks the blade out and swirls it twice in a clockwise motion, then twice counterclockwise, a ritual he learned from his grandfather, who learned it from his ancestors. Historians still debate whether the swirl pattern references ancient Zulu battle formations or simply evolved as the most effective way to channel steam evenly across the blade's surface. But every smith agrees that missing a single swirl can spell disaster, uneven hardness warping, or a mishap so spectacular it endangers the entire pit. You tuck that fact into your memory like a code snippet, one plunge at 45 degrees, 2 clockwise swirls, 2 counter and out. You watch the steel's color shift from fiery orange to a deep steely blue. In mere seconds, each hue change a heartbeat in the life of the blade. The sound is a crisp snap, followed by a gentle ping, like breaking a chocolate bar, and it resonates in the hush as apprentices lean in, eyes wide. You recall the 1879 Battle of East Sandalwana, when similarly quenched assegais cut through British rifles with shocking efficiency. Those spears were tempered in dung just like this, and today's demonstration echoes that decisive moment in military history. Your skin prickles as steam settles and you breathe in the dung's earthy aroma. Imagine a blend of wet hay, sunbaked grass, and something smoky sweet, like a barnyard bonfire. It's oddly comforting, like cracking open a memory of childhood farm visits. You wipe a bead of sweat from your temple and note the pit master's furrowed brow as he inspects the blade's edge. A single, uneven ripple in the temper line could mean the difference between a spear that pierces armor and one that shatters on impact. Next, the master places the quenched blade on a nearby rack to air-cool. No water dip here. Too sudden and the steel would crack. Instead, he lets the metal whisper back to room temperature, preserving the microstructures forged in the dung's steamy embrace. You recall that sunrise in Section 5 when the bloom was born. Now you witness its transformation into a warrior's tool, each stage critical to its final strength. 3 light jokes bloom about pitching this as a spa treatment for swords, about forging your muscles with steam curls, about offering a quench your blade subscription box. But you let the reverent silence rule. An apprentice steps forward with a brush, flicking away stray ash and dung flecks. He touches the blade's spine with a gloved finger, feeling for any soft spots that escaped proper quenching. If he finds one, the master will reheat that section and repeat the dung plunge in micro batches. A painstaking fix that few dare attempt. You watch the apprentice's finger trace the edge of ritual as precise as a doctor's stethoscope, listening for any irregular heartbeat in the steel. As the blade cools fully, you notice a faint iridescence along its ridge, the so-called tempered martensite, that gives the steel both hardness and toughness. Strange fact, chemical analyses show trace nitrides in some dung-quenched blades, suggesting that ammonia in the dung may have introduced nitrogen to the steel's surface, a primitive nitriding effect, centuries before European smelters even knew the word. You can practically imagine that nitrogen whispering into the steel's grain, weaving an extra layer of resilience. You step back and admire the master, lifting the blade skyward, the lantern light catching its gleaming edge like a sliver of dawn. Apprentices clap wooden mallets against yokes, a customary salute to the blade's new birth. The sound rolls across the compound like distant thunder, tying you to every Zulu forge that ever rang in triumph or mourning. You feel a surge of connection. This isn't just metalworking. It's ancestral memory, past handshake to handshake. The quench pit's steam has cooled to a gentle haze, and the dung patties now repose in silent dignity. You run your hand through the still warm air, tasting the last wisps of that pungent, promising fog. You tuck your gaze to the master who sets the blade aside for final straightening and polishing with rivers, and grit a precursor to the mirror sheen that will catch an enemy's eye in battle. Before you turn away, the master offers you a chance to hold the quenched blade's tang. You grasp it, feeling the residual warmth seep into your palm. It's a pulse of history, a whisper of every swirl and hiss that shaped this steel. You close your eyes and recall the smoky cauldron of the bloomery, the chorus of hammers, the hush of ritual ash, and now the steam-drenched crescendo of dung quenching. And so, as you step away from the pit, the echo of that final swirl lingers like the tail of a comet. You carry with you the secret choreography of dung, quenching a dance of angles, timing, and community wisdom that turns molten metal into enduring blades. In Zulu forges, that steam is more than a coolant. It's the breath of ancestors, the oath of warriors, and the heartbeat of a people who cooled steel with cattle dung and forged their own destiny. You settle beside the smoldering quench pit, watching wisps of steam curl like ghostly serpents around the stone rim, and you feel the heat ebb into the cooler evening air as you prepare to unravel the thermodynamic mysteries hiding in cattle dung. Imagine yourself at the 1879 Battle of Rorke's Drift, where reinforcements sharpened weapons by dung quench under moonlight. Those same spears bore edges so resilient they could slice through leather and bone, with uncanny ease. Tonight, you're not just a bystander. You're about to peer into the chemistry that turns humble cow droppings into a high-speed heat absorber. You breathe in the Dung's earthy perfume, wet grass mingled with a faint ammonia tang that tickles the back of your throat, and you remember that raw cattle dung can be 60-80% water. That water's specific heat capacity, the energy needed to raise its temperature by 1 degree, is nearly 4 times that of steel. So when your red-hot blade plunges in, the dung slurps up heat with insatiable appetite. You can practically hear the metal begging for relief, like you at the end of a sweltering workday collapsing into an ice bath. 3 light jokes skate through your mind about dialing your home thermostat down with dung fumes, about startup ads promising cow-cool technology, about fans applying to get a share of the steam profits. But you tuck them away, letting the physics do the talking. As the master smith dips a spear shaft into the steaming pit, you note how the latent heat of vaporization comes into play. Each gram of water turning to steam steals over 200 joules of energy, pulling heat out of the steel faster than ordinary water quenches. Strange fact, in some tests, dung quenching matched oil quench rates, despite being 95% aqueous, an unlikely crossover under the hood of modern metallurgical tables. You feel a faint shiver as steam hisses around your ankles, marveling that every splash sets off a microscopic firework of evaporation, each bubble bursting like a tiny carnival pop. You lean in close to the bubbling surface and notice flecks of fibrous grass and ash dancing atop the steam tiny islands that insulate small patches of the blade, creating localized hotspots. Blacksmiths master this by swirling the steel just so ensuring no section remains trapped under a float of fibers. Historians still debate whether the swirling pattern mimics Zulu battle formations or evolved simply to dethrone these insulating islands. But every smith agrees that missing the swirl sears your reputation worse than a dull edge ever could. Your fingertips brush the air peppered with steam, and you inhale the acidic hint of ammonia released as urea in the dung breaks down under heat. That ammonia can diffuse into the steel's surface, yielding a primitive nitriding effect, hardening the outer layer just enough to resist wear. A strange little tidbit hovers in your thoughts. Some have found measurable nitrogen concentrations in dung-quenched edges, suggesting the process tickled the steel with a whisper of chemical modification centuries before Westerners dreamed up surface treatments. You chuckle at the idea of Zulu Blacksmiths pioneering nitriding, while European forges were still figuring out how to keep bellows from smoking out the smith. Above the forge, bellows pulse in the distance, and you feel your own pulse quicken, drawn into the rhythmic dance of heat and dung. You recall that in European water quench, the rapid cooling rate can cause martensitic transformations, but often at the cost of cracking. Here, dung's combination of water, organic fibers, and ash tempers the quench velocity just right, giving a balance of hardness and toughness, like finding the perfect ratio in a chocolate-to-milk smoothie. 3 light jokes flicker about offering extra fiber health bars for blades, about fans demanding dung-infused hair care, about calling this method grassy, dewy quenches. But you let the mental taste test linger. Next, you step back and watch apprentices clear spent dung from the pit's edges, revealing how the steam plumes retreat like waves rolling off a beach. You note how the slight ash residue left on the blade will be ground away later, but not before letting the metal sit in open air to complete its transformation. Strange fact, some old smithing manuals advise waiting exactly 21 minutes before polishing, claiming that this cooling pause allows carbon to redistribute evenly, a subtle jig in the thermodynamic choreography that few modern forges remember. A sudden breeze rattles the grass beyond the forge yard, and you close your eyes, tasting the moisture-laden air. It feels like stepping out of a sauna into a crisp forest dawn. You can almost feel the heat gradient trace down your arms, a living testament to how heat flows from metal into dung, then into air, then into your memory. You inhale again, anchoring that sensory loop, steam, hiss, ammonia, tang, ash, whispers, and that final crisp note of tempered steel. You bend to inspect a newly quenched spearhead laid across heated bricks, the surface glinting in streaks of blue timberline. The blade feels cool to the touch, its tip firm yet resilient under gentle pressure. You press a fingertip to the spine, searching for any give none. You marvel that such microscopic fractures formed by steam-induced thermal shock don't weaken the blade but reinforce it, akin to tempering glass through controlled thermal stress. It's heat absorption alchemy, distilled by rural ingenuity. Above the hammer chorus resumes as another bloom emerges from the hearth, destined for its dung immersion. You can almost see the thermodynamic script unfold. Coal to flame, to bloom, to quench to tempered blade, all choreographed by water's appetite, steam's flight, and organic fiber's embrace. You remember wrestling with arcane physics in school calorimetry phase diagrams. But here it hums in your bones, pulsing in every hiss and crackle. You step away from the quench pit, the dung-streaked ground resonating beneath your feet like the echo of a great drum. In that echo, you sense the triumph of a people who harness terrestrial cycles, grass to cow to dung to steam to forge steel worthy of empire. And even if the world's engineers long overlooked cattle byproduct here in Zulu, forges, thermodynamics wasn't an equation in a book. It was a living art, whispered in steamy breaths and carried home in every sharpened edge. So, as the night unfurls and the village songs rise, you carry this newfound respect for dung's cooling chemistry, a blend of water's heat, capacity, organic fibers' agitation, ammonia's subtle chemistry, and ash's moderating touch. In the dance of plunging metal and bursting steam, you've witnessed science and spirit entwine, proof that sometimes the oddest materials hold the deepest secrets. And as you leave the pit's smoky aura behind you, feel the thermodynamic pulse of history humming in your veins, ready to shape your own next great endeavor. You kneel at the edge of the quench pit, its rim still warm beneath your palms, and you draw in a slow, steady breath as the village gathers in a perfect circle of reverent anticipation. Tonight, before the river of steam and dancing embers carries your blade through its baptism, you're entering the sacred realm of rituals and ancestral prayers, an age-old practice as vital as the steel itself. Imagine the hush that fell over these same pits during Sechueo's 1873 coronation, when smiths paused their hammers to invoke the spirit of Dingane's forge by moonlight. That night, the air crackled not just with heat, but with the power of collective devotion. You lift your head to see the Induna holding aloft a calabash of sorghum beer, its crimson-painted lip glinting in lantern light, and you hear the low hum of elders chanting the names of forebears whose hands first coaxed iron from ore. A strange fact drifts into your mind. Some smiths believe that whispering an ancestor's praise as you pour the libation imbues each steel billet with a unique voice, a tiny vibration that later makes the blade sing when it cleaves through the air like tuning a guitar by stroking its strings before the show. You feel the scent of burning mokula incense crafted from crushed marula bark and wild sage curl around your senses, mingling with the primal tang of dung steam and the faint metallic note left from earlier quenching. Your fingertips brush the engraved totem carved into the clay beside the pit, a stylized rhino whose horn spirals upward in prayer, and you trace its curves as the drums pound a slow rolling cadence. 3 light jokes flutter through your mind about fans demanding their own ritual before switching on about Kickstarter campaigns for ancestor-approved forges, about licensing your blade with a ghostly endorsement, but you hush them, letting the ritual's gravity settle in your bones. As the choir of voices rises, you close your eyes and utter a soft humbakale, offering peace to the spirits of the forge, while the Induna sprinkles droplets of beer into the pit like captured stars falling into a hellish sky. A village elder steps forward, his voice trembling with age and authority as he recites the ancient invocation Nkosi Yamahosi Bheka Fansi, Kulendawo Vunula, Amehlo Aho Emimoya, Yabasizwe Sethu, calling upon the Lord of Lords to watch over this place and open the eyes of the spirits of our people. Historians still debate whether those words date back to Shaka himself or were woven into blacksmithing lore centuries later. But either way, the chant vibrates through the earth, stirring embers in hidden hearths. You tilt your head as the elders' hands rise and fall in rhythmic grace, each gesture folding gratitude, supplication, and challenge into the night air. You trace his worn fingers painted with red ochre from last year's harvest rites, and you sense that this moment weaves time into itself, the forge's furious heat, meeting the gentle hands of time-honored ceremony. The libation empty, the elder smears a dab of beer on the carved horn of a kudu skull hanging above the pit, then presses it against his brow in respectful salute. A guard of apprentices rings copper anklets in unison, their soft tinkle like wind chimes, caught in an unseen breeze. Another strange fact, those anklets once doubled as metronomes, guiding smiths' hammer strikes so their rhythm echoed the heartbeat of ancestral drums. You half expect the ground to tremble beneath you, carried on the resonance of 100 years of hammer and anvil hymns, but instead the air stills waiting. 3 more light jokes drift by about fans asking for earplugs, about forging soundstage soundtracks, about artisanal ice makers downward in envy, but you let the hush remain undisturbed. A slender ember splitter wanders through the circle carrying a folded strip of bark inscribed with prayers of protection and blessing. He lays it across the pit's lip, then fans a torch flame until the bark curls and smokes its acrid plume, rising in thanks to the spirits that shepherd steel. You inhale the fragrant haze, tasting hints of citronella and smoke, a combo that bitingly reminds you of bonfires on misty hilltops. The smith master leans in, murmuring a quick word in your ear. Bona amandla, feel the power of what you touch. His voice is gravel and velvet, and for a moment you feel the spiritual energy waiting at your fingertips, ready to weave through the hot metal. Then, as the final prayer echoes into silence, the Induna raises a singular cow horn to his lips and sounds a low resonant note that vibrates through every rib and bone. That horn blast is the signal to begin the quench. It carries the faith of the village into the steaming maw of the pit. You steady your grip on the tongs holding the searing blade, and in that instant you're both smith and supplicant, charged with the task of honoring ancestors by forging a weapon worthy of their legacy. You probably won't survive a misstep at this stage. One dropped billet could shatter not just steel, but communal pride. But you steel yourself against doubt, feeling the ancestral handshake at the base of your spine. As you step forward, the drum cadence resumes, but now it swells into a triumphant roar, urging you on. You plant your feet firmly, draw a breath of dung, steam-scented air, and plunge the blade into the steaming dung with the ritual swirl learned at your elder's knee. Steam hisses like a choir of redirected prayers, each pop a note in an ancient melody. You pull the blade free, cooled and tempered, and you feel the blade's new life humming in your palm. The villagers murmur blessings, the elder smiles with eyes bright as lanterns, and you realize that the spirit of every smith who ever lived here flows through that moment. In the aftermath, the drummers fade into gentle clapping, and the apprentices carefully rake spent ash and dung aside, treating the pit with the same respect as a sacred hearth. You stand among them, the lingering incense haze curling around your shoulders, knowing that this forging rite is more than metallurgy. It's a communion, a bridge between the living and the departed. The fire may dim, the dung may dry, and the breath of ancestors may dissipate, but their presence will linger in every blade quenched tonight. And as you tuck away this ritual's memory, you carry with you the realization that true power is forged not just in fire and water, but in the unwavering faith that guides each swing of hammer and hiss of steam. The dawn mist clings to your shoulders as you stand at the crest of Cockley Hill, its slopes still whispering tales of the 1820 battle, where Zulu steel's true power first roared across the veld. Above, you felt the forge's heat and honored ancestral rites. Now you're tracing how those dung-quenched blades became the legendary isiZulu assegais that reshaped history beneath Shaka's command. Picture ranks of warriors gripping slim, deadly spears, each gleaming from its final steam bath in cattle dung, poised to charge like living thunder against enemy lines. You probably won't survive a straight-on assault without that edge and edge honed by dung's vapor embrace. You step forward, the dew-soaked grass whispering beneath your feet like a secret herald of what's to come. Strange fact, some early British accounts mention Sikh soldiers marveling at Zulu spears snapping through their muskets' wooden stocks, a feat attributed to the martensitic structure locked in place by that dung quench. You breathe in deeply, tasting the faint tang of iron on morning air, and you imagine those very assegais slicing through the silence here, their tips unbending their edges, singing. 3 light jokes flicker about calling these spears cow-powered cutting tools, about adding a coffee option to the quench ritual, about fans suggesting a Dung 2.0 edition, but you stifle them, honoring the moment's gravity. As you reach the summit, you see a lone warrior standing sentinel, his silhouette framed by rising sun. His right hand rests on a pair of fresh assegais, their shafts polished smooth, and their spearheads darkened by the final dwell in steaming dung. He tips a nod your way, and you spot the timberline shimmering in the light, an unbroken ribbon of blue that speaks of perfect hardness and toughness. Historians still debate whether Shaka insisted on dung quenching for every weapon or merely for elite regiments. But some say he reserved the technique for the Ibutho unit that first breached the enemy's flank here. You crouch beside a worn granite outcrop to study hoof prints and flattened grass evidence of the ironclad charge that shattered the opposing force's shield wall. You recall above how quench pits hissed under the night sky. Now you hear the distant echo of battle drums, a phantom rhythm that thrums in your chest. Imagine warriors gripping dung-tempered blades, unsheathing them in perfect unison, their courage sharpened by every swirl and hiss they witnessed at the forge. Their resolve was as engineered as their steel. A gust of wind sweeps across the hill, carrying the faint crunch of gravel from a nearby path. You fold your arms, inhaling the scent of wet earth and history. Strange fact, some oral traditions claim that Shaka personally tested each new batch of assegais by slashing a gourd filled with palm wine. If it emptied in a single clean motion, the blade passed muster. You chuckle at the image of a ruler conducting quality control with vintage spirits, but the lore underscores the importance placed on weapon performance. Ahead, you spot the gentle rise where the enemy's center once faltered. You trace the contour, imagining a spear thrust so precise it pierced multiple ranks, before bending steel tough enough to endure that brutal torque, thanks to Dung's unique cooling flash. You taste the tang of metal in your mouth, a reminder that every quench embeds a whisper of Dung's chemistry into steel's soul. 3 light jokes nudge at you about fans wanting to cool their smartphones in dung pits, about launching a dung quench VR experience, about spear-shaped bookmarks for battlefield memoirs, but you let the solemn hush prevail. You rise and walk to the battlefield's edge, where a small cairn of stones marks the site of the chief's command post. A weathered plaque tells of Shaka, pacing here, watching his reed-thin regiments fold back their shields after the initial charge, then pivoting to deliver a counterblow with dung-hardened spears that few could withstand. The plaque's text notes his warrior swords were tempered by dung, their spirits tempered by his will. You pause, feeling the pulse of that moment ripple through time. A lone vulture circles overhead, its wings slicing air like the beveled edge of an assegai. You tilt your head, following its glide, and you realize that vultures, though drawn here by conflict's aftermath, also symbolize watchfulness and survival, echoing how steel-tempered in dung enabled Zulu forces to endure. You inhale the highland air smoke of distant kraals, scent of damp grass, hint of Dung's earthy perfume still clinging faintly to your skin. It's the olfactory echo of a technology that turned cattle byproduct into empire. Below you, valleys stretch into the horizon, flecked with cattle herds and the brittle remains of ancient termite mounds. You imagine those herds supplying dung for countless quench pits through the decades each cycle, feeding new generations of warriors. The landscape itself becomes a living ledger, grass-eaten dung, deposited steel forged battles won. Strange fact, some ironworkers claim that dung sourced from cattle grazing near termite mounds, rich in clay minerals, yielded the fiercest temper lines thanks to micro-impurities acting like tiny grain refiners in the steel. You smile at the thought of blades seasoned by Earth's own geological quirks. You kneel once more, pressing your palm against a flat stone warmed by morning sun. You close your eyes, letting the vibrations of battlefield lore, smithing craft, and ancestral faith merge within you. In that quiet, you hear the distant hum of drums carried on the wind, a tribute to both the living and the fallen. The warrior sentinel approaches and lays an assegai at your feet, the shaft resting gently across your lap. You grip it, feel it, the weight perfectly balance the temper line running pale blue under its edge. You rise, lifting the assegai skyward in homage to the hill's silent testimony. The spearhead catches sunlight, and in that glint you see every blacksmith swirl, every dung quench hiss, every ritual invocation etched into its metal. It's the testament that no matter how humble the material cattle dung ash and sweat, when harnessed by skill and spirit steel, becomes destiny's tool. And as you stand above Gikokli Hill, assegai in hand, you carry forward the legacy of fumes and fire cows and courage. You've traced the forge to the battlefield quench pit to spear, and in doing so, you've touched the edge of history itself, cooled not by water or oil, but by the steam-born secrets of Zulu blacksmiths and their ingenious use of cattle dung. You settle onto a sun-warmed rock beside the forge, its surface still humming with latent heat, and you lean in for a closer look at the gleaming spearhead resting across your knees. Above you, traced blades tempered by dung steam. Now you're about to uncover an even subtler secret, hiding in cattle byproduct nitrogen's gentle boost to steel's edge. Imagine standing amid the aftermath of the 1879 Battle of Ulundi, where King Tshwayo's forces wielded dung-quenched spears so resilient they carved through British shields like paper, and sensing that a whisper of chemical magic played a part in that fierce performance. You run a fingertip along the blade's spine, feeling the cool sweep of polished steel under your palm, and you recall how the dung quenches ammonia-laced steam subtly deposited nitrogen into the metal's surface. This primitive nitriding effect, where nitrogen atoms diffuse into the steel at high temperature, yields a microscopic layer of hardened steel, called white layer by metallurgists. Strange fact, some surviving spears show elevated surface nitrogen levels up to 0.1%, enough to boost wear resistance and edge retention without compromising toughness. You probably won't survive a face full of ammonia-scented steam without crinkling your nose, but that same pungent fizz is what silently sharpens Zulu steel beyond mere thermal shock. As you spin the assegai's polished shaft between your palms, you feel the tang of iron beneath your fingertips and taste a faint sour note in the air, an olfactory echo of steam born from urea breakdown. 3 light jokes flicker through your mind about launching a Dung 2.0 smartphone app with built-in nitrogen infusion, about offering cow-fortified energy drinks, about fans demanding nitrogen-rich cooling systems. But you tuck them away, letting this ancient chemistry command your wonder. You inhale again, tasting dust, and resolve as you imagine early Smiths unknowingly tweaking nitrogen content with each dung batch they tossed into the pit. You glance over to the Induna, who stands watchful by a pile of fresh dung patties. You catch his eye, and he nods in silent acknowledgement. He knows that herders once selected dung based on herd diet, noting that cattle fed on nitrogen-fixing legumes like wild beans and lupines produced dung richer in urea and ammonia. If that subtle dietary detail meant nitrogen levels in the quench steam could vary by season, imparting a nuanced control over blade properties. Historians still debate whether Zulu Smiths consciously linked cattle grazing practices to quench outcomes, or if it emerged as a happy accident discovered through trial. But this interplay of ecology and metallurgy hints at a sophisticated, holistic craft. You stand and pace toward a trough where apprentices rinse blades in sand for polishing. The rhythmic scuff of sandstone echoes in the courtyard, and you recall the 838 Battle of Blood River, where drought conditions forced forges to rely on drier dung with lower water content producing less steam but higher ammonia concentration. Some accounts say those assegais snapped back with surprising resilience, as if the nitrogen-infused steel gained strength under adversity. Whether that's legend or fact is part of the enduring debate, but the anecdote underscores Dung's dynamic chemistry. A gentle breeze stirs acacia leaves overhead, carrying whispers of distant cattle lowing. You lift the spearhead to catch sunlight in its tempered ridge, and you notice a faint bluish sheen that deepens under close scrutiny, a hallmark of nitrogen-enriched martensite, known to metallurgists as nitride-tempered steel. Feelings of awe wash over you as you sense that every swirl into dung steam also carried a swirl of nitrogen into steel's crystalline lattice, reinforcing its backbone. 3 light jokes bubble about marketing spoons that self-sharpen with nitrogen dust, about fans demanding fertilizers in their cooling pads, about crowd-funded dung tech nitrogen boosters. But you let the gravity of this ancient innovation stay front and center. You lower the blade and trace a pattern in the dust with your foot, drawing a small circle that mirrors the quench pit's shape. In that circle, you see the forge's complete life cycle: ore to bloom, bloom to bar to edge, edge to battle. Now, add nitrogen's ghostly fingerprint to that cycle, and you realize Zulu Smiths unwittingly pioneered surface engineering techniques centuries before Western industry codified them. Their nitrogen boost wasn't written in textbooks. It was whispered in steam and etched into spearhead reputations. You wipe your brow with the back of a soot-stained hand and notice the apprentices openly exchanging glances, marveling at the blade's cool lure. You pass the spear to one of them, and he lifts it with reverent curiosity, his eyes wide, as he runs a finger along the temper line. You share a knowing smile in this moment. You're both student and teacher in a living tradition that blends elemental forces into weapons of history. A distant drum roll interrupts your thoughts, a signal that a demonstration is about to begin. You follow the sound to a small clearing where two breeds of dung await side by side, one from cattle grazing on nitrogen-poor grasslands, the other from herds feeding on legume-rich pastures. Apprentices have forged identical steel bars to test quench differences. You watch as two smiths plunge their bars into separate dung pits, the steam plumes rising in twin geysers. In a few moments, they will strike those bars together, measuring ring resonance and edge chatter. It's a live experiment echoing through time. As you step closer, you smell the sharper ammonia bite from the legume dung, and you notice the steam's yellowish tint, an indicator of higher nitrogen concentration. You place your hand on a cooled bar quenched in that dung and feel its ring, a crisp, clear note that dwarfs the dull thud of the control bar. A hush falls over the circle as the master smith pronounces, "Nitrogen reigns." You feel a thrill in your chest. Science, ritual, and community craft converge in that moment, proving once more that Zulu Blacksmiths harnessed both steam and chemistry to master steel. You step back, letting apprentices gather the tools, and you carry with you the resonance of that ring. In the villages and battlefields of Zululand, nitrogen was more than a gas in the air. It was a hidden ally in metal's metamorphosis. And even though modern forges now tune nitriding furnaces with precision gas controls, none can replace the raw elegance of cattle dung's humble infusion. You lean against the weathered stockade palisade of Rorke's Drift, the air still thick with the aftermath of the 1879 Anglo-Zulu War, and you brace yourself for the British officers' bewildered reports about Zulu blacksmiths cooling steel with cattle dung. Imagine page after page of red-faced dispatches describing hissing pits and dung-fueled spears that snapped muskets, and two reporters scrawling by lantern light, pen shaking as they tried to reconcile Victorian logic with veld ingenuity. You probably won't survive the cringe of reading some of their mythical accounts. One even swore the Zulu steam cauldrons were enchanted by witch doctors. But the astonishment shines through every line. You step down from the embankment, the crunch of dried grass under your boots echoing like rolling thunder from distant skirmishes, and you feel the lingering heat of that legendary siege. A sudden breeze carries the faint scent of that same dung steam, mingled with the acrid tang of gunpowder residue from cannon fire, an olfactory time capsule that jerks you back to the moment when British steel struggled to hold an edge against Zulu assegais. Strange fact, one bewildered Royal Artillery captain wrote home, claiming the Zulu pits hissed like miniature volcanoes, and that warriors emerged from the steam, bathing in a fireproof armor, a description so fanciful even his superiors filed it under exaggerated nonsense. Three light jokes flicker about fans lobbying for volcano mode, about battlefield spa days being the next recruitment tactic, about crowdfunding a Zulu quench tank experience. But you tuck them away, letting history's dry humor float in the haze. You wander into a makeshift museum set up under an old supply tent where battered muskets and splintered shields lie beside Zulu-crafted spearheads still gleaming with temper lines. A display plaque quotes Lieutenant Colonel Durnford's diary. Their blades emerged from pits of dung sharper than any enamored jeweler's best knives. Historians still debate whether Durnford actually wrote that line or if it grew from campfire gossip. But either way, the myth stuck, fueling Victorian fascination with African steel witchcraft. You brush your fingers along a spearhead's ridge, feeling the same cool smoothness you felt beside the quench pit itself, and you taste the metallic memory of heated battles. Beyond the tent, you find a cluster of British veterans nursing mugs of bitter tea around a fire. They swap tales of being ordered to inspect Zulu steel workshops under strict penalty for ridicule, only to witness steam up to their waists and embers crackling in dung-lined trenches. One old sergeant leans in, voice husky. "I tell you, son, we thought our breeches would vaporize." You smile at their camaraderie, imagining their stiff upper lips quivering at unexpected steam blasts, like fans accidentally discovering steam-cleaned settings. Yet beneath the humor, you sense genuine respect. They knew something extraordinary had happened here. You stroll over to a reproduction forge demonstration where a modern smith in period attire recreates a dung quench for curious onlookers. He plunges a glowing blade into a steaming pit, and you feel the heat's pulse ripple through the soil beneath you. Spectators flinch at the hiss, then break into applause as the master smith withdraws a perfectly balanced weapon. You recall above how British officers gaped at this very spectacle, scribbling rapid notes with quivering hands. 3 light jokes press at your lips about pitching this as the next great British bake-off challenge, about fans demanding dung quench certification, about spear-throwing enthusiasts signing up for Zulu steel camps. But you let the reenactments hush. Hold you? Nearby, a group of school children in khaki uniforms giggle as a guide wields an assegai with theatrical flair. The guide recounts tales of Lieutenant Chard's disbelief at Zulu forges. He thought the pits were pitfalls, cursed traps set by savages. Historians still debate whether Chard's quote was a genuine telegram to London or post-war embellishment by souvenir hunters, but you note how every retelling bends the truth like heated steel. You crouch to adjust a small sign explaining how Dung's ammonia imparted a nitriding effect, modern science finally catching up with 19th century folklore. The children tug at your sleeve eyes shining, and you grin as they press their palms to the pit's rim, feeling residual warmth as if touching history itself. A breeze rustles a faded Union Jack hung off a nearby tent, and you pause to ponder colonial misunderstandings. British engineers in Durban once examined dung-quenched blades and dismissed them as impossible anomalies, only to replicate quench tests, with mixed results finally concluding there must be sorcery involved. Yet here on the ground at Rourke's Drift, you know the secret was never magic, but meticulous knowledge of dung moisture, quench timing, stirring patterns, and ancestral rituals. You inhale the blended scents of tea dung steam and charred oak wood, and you marvel at how colonial myths overshadowed the true craftsmanship. You walk to a memorial plaque listing the Zulu warriors who defended their homeland and see a hand-blown glass case with a single assegai inside. A small card reads, "This blade was quenched in cattle dung on the eve of battle forging resilience and valor." You lean closer, tasting the bitter edge of both admiration and sorrow, recalling how so many lives turned on the meat of these sharpened edges. The morning sun glints on the glass, refracting into tiny rainbows across the grassy knoll, a fitting tribute to the spectrum of human resilience. As you step back, the hum of modern traffic drifts in from the distant main road, a reminder that time has marched on since those steam-wreathed nights. Yet standing here, you feel the hush of those colonial observers' gasps reverberate still. You tuck away the memory of their wide-eyed reports, half incredulous, half respectful, and you carry forward the truth they overlooked, that ordinary materials like cattle dung and charcoal coupled with ancestral wisdom can outperform even industrial conventions. You find yourself wandering through the cracked concrete floors of a shuttered colonial-era workshop where rusted anvils rest beneath peeling paint and the lingering scent of charcoal ghosts floats in the air. Above you, witness the heights of Zulu metallurgy under Shaka and the clang of siege-tested assegais. Now, you're at the somber moment when Dung quenching nearly vanished under the weight of colonial rule, only to be resurrected by determined heritage artisans. Imagine British officials strolling into these forge villages in the early 20th century, their polished boots stamping out embers and passing edicts that labeled indigenous ironworking uncivilized. You probably won't survive hearing some of their pompous proclamations. One magistrate insisted steam-filled pits endangered public morals. But in that erasure, you glimpse the fragile line between progress and preservation. You step over a threshold where the light shifts to dust-speckled gloom, and you taste the bitterness of lost tradition on your tongue, the faint tang of soot mixed with the sharp sting of erased memory. Strange fact, some colonial records note that one enterprising Zulu smith was prosecuted for polluting water sources after dung steam seeped into a nearby stream, an accusation so absurd it would make any modern environmental lawyer blush. 3 light jokes flicker in your mind about fans demanding a heritage mode setting, about crowdfunding a Save Our Steam campaign, about launching artisanaldungquench.com. But you let the irony settle in your bones. You crouch by a cold forge, its iron brackets still etched with the initials of a British engineer who once refitted it for a wool milling machine. Historians still debate whether the colonial suppression of traditional forges was aimed more at disarming the population or redirecting their labor to European industries, but either way the result was clear. Many smithing families saw their sacred rituals broken, their quench pits filled in, and their ancestral chants replaced by factory whistles. You feel the weight of that rupture pressing down on you, as if the walls themselves remember the last hiss of dung steam before silence took hold. Beyond the workshop lies a courtyard overrun with scrub grass and the ghosts of dung-lined trenches. You lean against a crumbling wall and inhale the musty aroma of decay, imagining how easily steam and ritual were stifled by red tape and taxes. A sudden breeze carries the soft clink of metal apprentices returning, after decades away, their footsteps echoing like a call to arms. You stand brushing dust from your hands, and you sense the stirrings of revival, modern artisan forges popping up in nearby villages run by smiths who learned secret quench recipes whispered by aging grandparents. You wander into one such revival forge, vibrant with fresh charcoal fires and the rich aroma of dung steam mingling with eucalyptus smoke. You step closer to see young artisans cracking jokes as they huddle around a steaming pit, experimenting with blends of poultry droppings and cow dung to fine-tune steam viscosity. We're calling it Quench 3.0. One grins. It's like upgrading from dial-up to fiber optics, but smokier. Historians still debate whether these hybrid dung recipes truly improve edge retention or merely pay homage to ancestral methods. But the laughter and shared purpose breathe life into lost techniques. You feel the forge's heartbeat, a communal pulse, stronger than any colonial decree. Apprentices hand-mix dung paste with ash and river sand, testing moisture levels with practice pokes and sniff tests. The headsmith invites you to try. You press a fresh patty between your fingers, savoring the scent of dawn grass and hint of ammonia, marveling at how a few simple ingredients can resurrect a tradition nearly killed by steel mills and industrial regulations. A visitor from the city glances your way, smartphone in hand, snapping photos of the steaming pit. You catch her eye and she winks. This will trend on artisan TikTok. She jokes, Rashka Dung Quench Challenge. 3 light jokes bubble up about viral dance routines involving quench swirls, about fans requiring firmware updates for dung detection, about ordering gourmet dung patties on Eat Now apps. But you let the moment's authenticity shine. You follow the Smiths as they plunge a glowing billet into the pit, the steam erupting in a hushed hiss that feels like a collective sigh of relief. Apprentices lean in fingers, brushing the misty veil, tasting the faint sulfur sweetness, and imagining their ancestors watching from ember-lit shadows. You step back and watch the blade's color shift, recall nitrogen tails, and know that each swirl is a reclaiming of heritage, a triumph over centuries of erasure. As the sun sets, you join a small circle around a brazier where older smiths recount days when government agents seized dung supplies, thinking them unsanitary, only to return in confusion when industrial quench oils shattered more blades than they saved. A strange fact surfaces. Some elders still boast of hiding dung patties inside calves' stomachs to sneak them past inspectors, an ingenious bit of early subterfuge. You laugh and shake your head, feeling the thrill of clever resistance echo through time. Night falls and lanterns glow in the revival forge, casting dancing shadows on corrugated metal walls. You sit with a calabash of sweet sorghum beer as young and old share stories of droughts that nearly dried quench pits, of colonial edicts that nearly dried up tradition, and of recent workshops teaching youth how to press and store dung patties by moonlight. The rhythm of hammers, the whisper of steam, the murmur of ancestral prayers all converge to form a living tapestry woven from resilience itself. Before you leave the head, Smith presses a small charcoal-streaked billet into your palm, a token of rebirth. Carry this edge forward, he murmurs, and carry our story. You feel its warmth, the faint pulse of steam still dancing in its grain, and you tuck it into your satchel like a piece of living history. Stepping back into the dusty road, you breathe deeply, tasting the tang of renewal. The legacy of dung quenching has slipped from the pages of colonial dispatches into the hands of those who refuse to let it vanish. And as you walk away, you carry with you the echo of every suppressed forge, every reclaimed quench pit, and every whispered oath to keep steam and steel alive, proof that even under the harshest rule, ingenuity and spirit endure. You arrive at a cluster of thatched roof workshops nestled on the outskirts of a modern township, where the hum of power tools mingles with the ancient clang of hammer on anvil. Above you, saw colonial forces nearly snuff out dung quenching. Now you stand amid a grassroots revival, where preservation efforts breathe new life into Zulu blacksmithing heritage. Imagine artisans trading smartphone tutorials for whispered instruction in thatch-shrouded forges, determined to teach youth the exact moisture test, swirl pattern, and ancestral chant that once forged empires. You probably won't survive the sight of teenagers wielding dung-laden quench pits. Without a grin, this fusion of old and new is nothing short of inspiring. You step into the first workshop, where a group of high school apprentices in overalls huddle around a steaming pit, bent over measurement cups and hygrometers. Their mentor, a wiry smith with streaks of silver in his beard, guides them through modern scientific validation of their craft. Measure the ammonia levels. Note the steam velocity. Calibrate the swirl he instructs as they log data on tablets wired to portable weather stations. Strange fact, these young smiths have collaborated with a local university's materials lab to confirm the primitive nitriding effect, even publishing preliminary findings in a university newsletter, proof that dung quenching isn't just folklore, but a field of active research. 3 light jokes cross your mind about startup dreams of cow tech, about fans demanding Bluetooth-enabled quench pits, about crowdfunding a dung science expo. But you tuck them away marveling at the blend of tradition and technology. You move on to a community center-turned-forge where an NGO has installed demonstration stations for village children to try forging tiny nails and quenching them in dung slurry. Their eyes light up as they watch sparks fly and steam hiss. Their laughter and curiosity echo the same youthful wonder that once filled shadowy forges centuries ago. A visiting anthropologist steps forward, kneeling beside you to explain how these workshops also include language lessons, teaching isiZulu terms for every tool, material, and ritual gesture, ensuring the vocabulary lives on alongside the techniques. Historians still debate whether preservation should focus on technique or context, but here both flourish. Kids learn to press patties and recite ancestral invocations in perfect rhythm. Outside, a solar-powered kiln roasts dung patties to a precise moisture level, replacing hours of sun drying with a 2-hour cycle of controlled heat. You step inside, feeling the warm, dry air smell faintly of earth and embers, and you watch apprentices load freshly formed pellets onto woven racks. Strange fact, these kilns incorporate rainwater harvesting systems that mimic natural aging rehydrating patties just enough to match traditional texture, a high-tech nod to heritage perfection. You grin at the sight of a teenager tapping moisture readings into a smartphone app calling it Dung Dryer 3000, and you imagine future archaeologists marveling at code-laden quench recipes in the cloud. Further down, you find a local museum exhibit curated by youth volunteers. Glass cases display traditional dung patties alongside scientific charts plotting steam enthalpy, while touchscreens allow visitors to simulate quench patterns and observe virtual temper lines. You pause to tap the screen, selecting fast, frothy steam from sugargrass dung and steady mist from legume-fed patties, watching how each pattern affects digital steel microstructures. 3 light jokes flicker about fans demanding virtual reality dung dive experiences, about crafting dung quench NFTs, about spear making esports leagues. But you let the interactive exhibit speak for itself, bridging past and future in one tactile interface. You wander outside into a courtyard where an annual Steel and Steam Festival is underway, a celebration born just 5 years ago to rekindle community pride. Stalls line the path. One offers dung pit steam inhalation therapies for sore muscles. Another sells miniature quench pit dioramas as educational souvenirs. And a third serves coffee with foam art mimicking the hissing swirl of a quench. You inhale the coffee's smoky, sweet aroma, amused by the playful homage, and you bite into a pastry shaped like a quench pit, complete with green-tinged icing, representing grassy fibers. It's a perfect symbol of how heritage can be both revered and remixed. Among the festive crowd, you spot elders seated on benches carved with termite mound bas reliefs, sharing stories of how they hid dung patties in hollow gourds to preserve quench traditions through dark times. Their voices blend with a youth choir singing a modern anthem that weaves Asa's Zulu chant with electronic beats, another striking fusion of old and new. Strange fact, the anthem samples actual field recordings of steam hissing, transformed into a rhythmic backbone for the song's chorus, reminding everyone that steam is more than a byproduct. It's the heartbeat of their culture. As dusk falls and lanterns glow, you gather with a circle of smiths for a Twilight Forge demonstration. The air vibrates with anticipation as a young master smith presents a blade shaped earlier in the day. You watch as it plunges into the steaming dung pit, the hiss like a battle cry cut through the night. Apprentices cheer, and you feel the swell of communal pride this moment mirrors, battles won and traditions preserved alike. You remember their elders' chants now carried forward by new voices, attuned to both ancestral rhythms and algorithmic precision. Before you depart, you approach a digital kiosk where visitors can adopt a quench pit, donating to maintenance funds and receiving QR-coded certificates that track each pit's usage and recipe variations. You scan the code for the pit you just witnessed, and a smiling infographic pops up. Dung-type legume rich, moisture 72%, steam temp 220 degree Celsius, hammer swings 35, date today. You marvel at how neatly science and heritage intertwine, turning living tradition into open data celebration. Stepping into the twilight air, you carry with you the hum of power tools, the hiss of newfound quench pits, the laughter of children wielding dung patties, and the solemn pride of elders passing the torch. Preservation efforts today aren't about burying the past in glass cases. They're about lighting fresh forges with the embers of ancestral wisdom, fanning them with innovation and communal resolve. And as you walk away, you feel steam's whisper still clinging to your clothes, a reminder that in every quench lies a story reborn for new generations. You step out of the Zulu Forge's warm glow and into a comparative world of quenching practices where water, oil, and cattle dung each stake their claim to metallurgical fame. Tonight, you're not just exploring one secret technique, but mapping a global tapestry of cooling methods that shape blades from Damascus to Detroit. Imagine standing at the edge of the Ganges in ancient India, watching swordsmiths plunge curved tulwars into the sacred river at dawn, then leap continents to see medieval European knights christen their broadswords in linseed oil before charging at Agincourt. You probably won't survive juggling all these methods in a single thought, but that's the thrill of cross-cultural metalwork. You drag your fingers through a shallow trough of clear river water, tasting the crisp mineral note that hisses against sizzling steel. Water quenching is the oldest trick in the book, fast, fierce, and unforgiving. At the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, Japanese katana tempered in this method cut through rival armor with legendary precision, earning their wielders' names whispered in awe. Strange fact, samurai smiths sometimes added salts to the quench water, like saltpeter or sea salt, to adjust hardness and quench speed, a primitive chemical tweak long before modern quench oil formulas. 3 light jokes pop into your head about fans demanding a hydro mode setting, about ice cube tray quench experiments, about smartphone apps warning you water too hot. Yet you tuck them away, letting the physics of H2O speak for itself. As the blade's edge snaps out of the water with a high-pitched ping, you feel the jaw-tightening thrill of rapid thermal shock. The steel surface transforms into brittle martensite, almost instantly tough, but prone to cracking, like dropping a hot cookie onto cold ceramic. Historians still debate whether the samurai's soft-core, hard-edge strategy arose from deliberate layering or was simply a byproduct of regional water chemistry. But either way, the result was blades that could slice silk, yet survive the battlefield. You recall how dung-quenching steam cushion tempered shock more gently. Here there's no mercy, just a razor's edge and a gamble against fracture. You shift to an adjacent barrel, filled with golden linseed oil, its surface shimmering like a sunset trapped in resin. Oil quenching offers a slower, more controlled cooling rate than water, reducing the risk of cracks while still creating martensitic structure. You dip a gleaming billet into the oil and inhale the nutty aroma, a scent so comforting it could double as a spa treatment. 3 light jokes buzz about fans wanting nutty oil mist settings, about carving linseed candles shaped like spears, about hot yoga classes powered by quench pits. But you let the pungent richness hold you in its sensory embrace. A European longsword from the 14th century stands testament to oil's virtues. Blacksmiths in Germany and Italy swore by rapeseed, or flax oil quenching, producing swords both tough and flexible. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, some legends say English billmen wielded oil-tempered billhooks that bent under stress instead of shattering, then snapped back into shape for the next blow. Strange fact, medieval guild records mention secret oil blends spiked with animal fats or pine resin to tweak quench rates, a black market trade among sword masters. You smile at the idea of fans cornering the artisan oil market, but resist the joke honoring the craft's clandestine lore. Restating your earlier senses, you recall the earthy steam hiss of dung quenching and contrast it with water's sharp sputter and oil's gentle gurgle. Each method has its signature soundtrack and aroma, river minerals, resin, sweetness, or barnyard tang, like a barista offering 3 distinct brews: waterfall espresso, resin latte, and dung steam herbal infusion. You lean against a wooden post, closing your eyes to taste the memory of each cooling medium. It's a sensory reunion that binds global metallurgies across time. Next, you step to a modern high-tech quench tank, humming with synthetic polymers, and temperature controls, a far cry from kettle steam or pond water. Oil polymer blends offer extremely consistent cooling curves, reducing distortion and minimizing stress, ideal for precision parts in jet engines and industrial machinery. Strange fact, some aerospace engineers borrowed polymer quench principles from Zulu Dung quenching's steam phase moderation, adapting the concept of vapor blankets to engineered fluids. Historians still debate whether Dung quenching directly inspired polymer quench tech, or if the parallel emerged independently. But either way, the echo of ancient steam lives on in cutting-edge industries. Turning back to the forge courtyard, you stand between three quench pits, water, oil, and dung, each billowing its unique vapor or smoke. Apprentices set identical billets aflame and race to each pit, plunging blades into their chosen medium. You watch water quench with a crackling sizzle, oil with a muted whisper, and dung with a steamy roar, all cooling metal under different philosophies. A hush falls as the blades emerge, and apprentices test each edge on a thick leather target. The water-quenched blade sails through but flexes alarmingly. The oil-quenched blade cuts clean, yet shows slight warping. The dung-quenched blade splits leather crisply with minimal deflection. You note the subtle differences and savor the moment's scientific cake, 3 slices of cooling history each, with its own flavor profile. You recall that water quenching's blistering speed demands immediate tempering in ovens or secondary temper pits, lest the steel crack in your hand. Oil quenching buys time, but sacrifices ultimate hardness. Dung quenching, by contrast, offers a middle path, steamy moderation that yields balanced properties, perfect for battlefield versatility. It's like choosing between an intense HIIT workout, a steady treadmill jog, or a brisk dance class, each effective for fitness, but each tuned to a different goal. As the apprentices bag their quenched blades for further testing, you reflect on how societies chose quench methods based on resources and needs. Water was plentiful but crude. Oil required refinement and guild secrecy. Dung was abundant and overlooked by colonizers. Even now, you chuckle at the thought of fans evaluating resource availability metrics before hitting a power button. Yet, beneath humor lies admiration. Zulu forges turned local abundance into world-class steel, no imported oil or pristine river required. Dusk paints the sky in bruised purples and golds as you depart the quench courtyard, carrying the resonance of water's rush, oil's murmur, and dung's roar in your memory. You sense that every cooling method is more than technique. It's a cultural fingerprint, a testament to human ingenuity under local skies. And as you step into the night, you feel the faint echo of steam and vapor swirling around you, a global ember lighting the way forward. You cradle the final blade in your hands, its edge cool and smooth against your palm, and you gaze across the flickering forge fires as the village settles into a calm hush. Above, you've navigated every quench pit, every swirl of steam, and every hissing baptism of red-hot steel. Now you're standing at the culmination of Dung wisdom's legacy, where past merges with future under an endless African sky. Imagine the vast tableau of centuries unfolding before you. Shaka's warriors charging with dung-quenched assegais at Gakakli Hill, British observers gaping at steam-laced trenches at Rorke's Drift, and now a modern generation raising these very methods onto global stages, like the 2010 FIFA World Cup opening ceremony in Johannesburg, where living forges shared their smoke with the world. You probably won't survive trying to pack every epic moment into one thought, but that's the beauty of a tradition so resilient it spans epochs. You lift the blade toward the soft glow of lanterns lining the courtyard, and you smell its quiet steam, residue, and earthy whisper of ammonia, ash, and soot that clings to history as tenaciously as the Zulu people cling to their heritage. Strange fact, during the World Cup celebration, mobile forge workshops traveled to fan zones hissing dung steam beside vuvuzela rallies, igniting chants that blended football anthems with ancestral metallurgy. 3 light jokes swirl in your mind about fans offering halftime quench demos, about crafting gold-worthy spearheads, about startups pitching dung-quenched Tim merchandise. But you stifle them, letting the moment hold its sacred gravity. As apprentices begin tidying ashes and reorganizing dung patties for tomorrow's demonstrations, you step between the forges to reflect on how colonial bands nearly erased these pits, only for modern artisans to resurrect them with solar dryers, lab-tested moisture meters, and smartphone apps that log quench metrics for open-source study. Historians still debate whether the forced industrialization under apartheid dealt a final blow to indigenous ironworking, or if it merely drove smiths underground, preserving the craft in whispered rituals and hidden pits. But either way, the result is a phoenix-like revival that illuminates every splintered anvil with new purpose. You steady your breath and notice how the village's heartbeat matches the forge's pulse. The steady tap of hammer on anvil, the soft rustle of cowhide bellows, and the lingering hiss of steam breathing in the night air. You close your eyes and remember ancestors teaching the precise dairy to dung timeline, fresh dung by moonlight, aged patties by midday sun, ensuring each quench's moisture content danced between 60 and 75% for optimal steam cushion. It's a lesson no chemistry text could fully capture, a recipe scribbled in cow pies and handed down by calloused hands. A breeze stirs the hearth's embers, and you feel the heat ripple across your shoulders like a reassuring pat on the back. You inhale the layered aromas, sweet sorghum beer from earlier libations, ancestral incense still curling above the quench pits, and the faint metallic tang of finished blades, and you realize this legacy is as much about community as it is about technique. The same pits that forged weapons, forged bonds, smiths and herders' elders and apprentices, ancestors and descendants, all converging around steam-charged altars of iron. You step toward a low table where 36 perfected assegais lie in neat rows, their blades shimmering in memory of the 1828 Battle of Makonko, where dung-quenched spears shaped regional power. You pick one up, feeling its balance, then press the blade's spine against your thumb, solid, resilient, alive. You recall above how nitrogen whispers from ammonia-laced steam, tinted steel surface, and you trace a faint blue temper line, a living diagram of centuries of chemical alchemy. 3 light jokes dance on your lips about fans wanting quench-quality badges on swords, about spear-shaped USB sticks encoded with quench data, about reality TV shows titled Dung Pit Dynasty. But you release them into the night, honoring the weight of every quench, every chant, and every hushed vow to keep this craft alive. The wind carries a distant chorus voices in Aussie Zulu English and township slang blending with the crackle of embers, a multilingual tapestry woven by steam and iron. You set the assegai down gently and join the circle of smiths and apprentices. Together, you lift a final libation of sorghum beer, chanting a prayer that flows through ages. May our hands stay steady, our pits stay ready, and our steam ever rise in honor of those who came before. You sip the amber brew, tasting the sweetness of triumph and the tang of perseverance. As the embers fade to embers old gray, you step back and let the forge's warmth recede into memory. You breathe in one last time, savoring the pungent calm that follows each quench. You feel the hum of Dung wisdom vibrating through the ground beneath your feet, reminding you that even the humblest materials cattle dung ash. Charcoal can ignite empires and engineer legends. And as you stand beneath the African sky, star-strewn and eternal, you carry within you the final echo of every dung hiss, every hammer ring, every ancestral invocation. You realize that this legacy isn't sealed in glass cases or bound by history books. It lives in every student's grin, every revived pit steam plume, and every blade that whispers its story with each steel-cold edge. Now slow your breath and let the forge's warmth fade into gentle embers in your mind. Feel the soft hush of evening air brushing your skin, and let every residue of steam settle like feathers on your shoulders. Imagine the lullaby of distant crickets, slipping through open windows, the soft murmur of ancestral voices carried on the breeze, and the faint echo of hammers far away, resting until dawn. Let your thoughts drift with the heat's memory softening like cooled steel kissed by dusk until your heartbeat slows in perfect harmony with the silent forge. Rest now cradled in the hush of ancient pits and modern revivals. Close your eyes and hear the final whisper of steam. Embrace your dreams carrying you into a gentle night where every blade forged in dung-laced mist sings softly in slumber. Let the lullaby of the forge guide you until your mind cools, your breath quiets, and you slip into peaceful reverie, carried aloft on iron wings into sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.